Hello, I'm just going to look at the Wheel of the Archetypes in this video and reconsider our ideas about the inner and outer journeys and these kind of things. So please do have a look at the other videos I've previously done about the elemental journeys. I'll put the links to them in the description. But as a brief recap, we have a circle of archetypes, 12 archetypes. Each of these archetypes have two elements each, and they're in a specific order. So the Fool has fire and water, for instance. The Warrior has fire and earth. Mother Nature has earth and water. Patriarch has air and water. Actress has water and fire, etc. So you have a first and a second element for each of these archetypes. Now, of these archetypes, 4 of them are open or mutable archetypes, and these archetypes form the inner journey, which goes anti-clockwise around the circle. And you can have a look at the previous video on that. Likewise, 4 of the archetypes are closed or fixed archetypes, and these form the outer journey, which goes clockwise around the circle. Now, the other 4 archetypes that we have left are the cardinal archetypes, and these can act as open or closed archetypes and don't themselves take part in the journeys. Rather, it seems as if their energies circulate through the journeys itself. Now, the open and closed archetypes, or the fixed and mutable ones, we call these quadrant archetypes, And in many ways, it seems like the cardinal archetypes actually express through the quadrant archetypes. That's one way of looking at it, anyway. Now, how we had looked at this is that the open and closed journeys, the inner and outer journeys, they are basically what we need to function properly and to function well. So they really work well, and you can see this in many ways. The outer journey is very simple. You can see that ideas lead to passion, which lead to action, which lead to assessment, which leads back to a refining of ideas, for instance, And these archetypes are quite extroverted. That's one of their characteristics is they tend to be pretty extroverted archetypes. The inner archetypes, by contrast, tend to be introverted, And you find these ones go anti-clockwise, and so you find that this sense of soulfulness and imagination and imaginative freedom goes into the calming of the mind and the freeing of the mind, which then goes into the relaxation of the body, which then goes into vitality and creativity, which then leads back to further freeing of the imagination and of the inner life in that way. And those are the standard ways of looking at the journeys. Now, I came to ask some questions about this. In fact, somebody I know was asking questions about this, so I was thinking about this. And I came to actually have a look at, well, what about the reverse journeys, or the so-called reverse journeys? Because we had always thought of these as being really very negative and difficult. And as an example of the sort of things that happens when the energy is going in the wrong way, then what happens is these introverted archetypes get thrown out into the outer world where they can't really cope, And likewise, the extroverted archetypes, they get kind of internalized where they play havoc with our inner world, So we have that sort of a thing happening there. However, when I looked at it, well, for a start, I was thinking, because the inner world is essentially timeless, it's very difficult to see how you could have a sequential journey exactly, and yet we do see it here. It makes sense. But the funny thing is that the inner archetypes are timeless. And so is it really a journey, or are they all simultaneously there at the same time, if you see what I mean? Like resonating with each other? That's quite possible too. But then I thought, well, I mean, that is something to think about. But I also thought, looking at what we were calling the reverse outer journey, the reverse inner journey, which is these open archetypes going clockwise, yeah, I could see this as a really good model of the artistic process, yeah. So, you have imagination leading to artistic expression, leading to a kind of, the physical form of that expression, leading to the sort of peace and spaciousness of actually contemplating what you have done, yeah, leading back to further further imagination. That's one way of looking at it. But in any case, I could see that this journey seems to actually show an artistic process. For instance, it seemed to really work for me. But then I thought, well, okay, what it needs is support, though, because these are inner archetypes and they need support from outer processes. So you can see, for instance, with an artist, they need to have the space of a studio. They might need to have a patron. They would need to have some degree of skills which are separately developed to actually, for instance, market their work, or to sell their work, or to network with people, and all this sort of stuff, which has got nothing to do with art, basically. But they may have to do that, or have somebody do it for them in order for them to actually survive, or have a patron. So I thought, well, you know what? The clockwise inner journey, it works as well, but it needs support. It needs to be given space to actually live in the outer world according to its own inner law. And then I thought, well, what about the outer journey, which is the fixed archetypes? If they're actually going anti-clockwise rather than clockwise, and now we can see we get problems with this. We can see we get problems with this. For instance, we get imagination, we get feeling going into thinking, giving emotional thinking, and that thinking then goes into the matriarch, who then becomes a kind of executive factor rather than an assessing factor, and becomes controlling, and that suppresses the warrior, yeah, and tries to impose the warrior, yeah, on things. That inflames feeling again, which goes back into emotional thinking. So you can see, well, it's not going to work. But what we should also think about here is that what is happening is, just as the outer archetypes, when they're going the other way, the counter-normative way, you could call it, or whatever, but when they're going the outer way, the other way, yeah, they're actually getting put into the outer world, and they need space to do that. So they are going out into the world, but they need to be given space to do it. It's the reverse with the outer archetypes. When they're going into the counter direction, what's happening is that they are, in a sense, colonizing the inner world. Now, that's actually what happens with religion, and it's what happens to a certain extent with things like psychology. We colonize the inner world, and we actually impose structures in it to make it intelligible to us. And if this is done with a light enough touch and the right way, it can actually be healing, yeah. And it has uses, but you also have to be aware that there are potential problems involved with it. So the thing is, with both of the counter directions, whether it's inner or outer processes, there are hazards and potential problems which arise, but these things are also part of life, and I think, in a way, an essential part of life. Now, that is one set of things with it. There's another thing, however, and that is that, in a way, some of these reverse processes are part of the psyche trying to heal itself. And we can look again to the structure of the archetypes for this. where we find that each of the archetypes has two elements. For instance, the sage is air first, earth second. And in many ways, we can think of the second element as almost being a core element, and the first element as being its expression. It's one way of looking at it. Now, when and you could also look at the second element as almost being the subconscious of the archetype in a funny sort of way. Yeah. So when things aren't working properly and there's not a good relationship between the two constituent elements of the archetype, yeah, you're going to get the outer expression of, say, air here being cut off from the inner essence of earth. And then you're going to get problems. And what that does, I think, is drive it in a backwards direction. And it's driving it in a backwards direction to try and find the solution to something. Yeah. Now, when it's an outer archetype, I think you can probably see that it is driving it inwards to try and find where the blockage is and to then release it. I think that's what it's doing. So, warrior cut off from earth, it's going to get problems. You're going to get too much fire without the inner guidance of earth, and it's going to go into problems. It's going to get into real problems, real frustrations, and it will drive it inwards to try and find where the splinter is, so to speak. Now, with the outer archetypes, there's something again is happening, but it's driving the archetype to express outwardly when it would normally express inwardly, and we can see that sometimes that is actually an artistic process or a spiritual process, and it really does have functions there. So I think that's an interesting thing to maybe look at separately as well, as to what other things going on there and what can be going on there. But in any case, I hope that gives a quick view of some of the other perspectives you can have on the inner and outer journeys within the wheel of archetypes.